What's up guys, I'm Dean's Beans and welcome back to what is slowly becoming an annual tradition. I think it counts as an annual tradition if it's happened 3 times, where I rank every film I have seen in the previous year. So today I'm ranking every 2023 film I've seen. And I've seen 48, which is less films than I watched in 2022 and 2021. But who cares? I've got some good films to talk about, I've got some bad films to talk about, I've got some amazing films to talk about, and I see no reason why we shouldn't just jump straight into this once you guys leave a like on this video. In 48th place, we have 65. This film, in theory, should have been great, and in theory, it should have done amazing at the box office. It's a film about dinosaurs and sci-fi starring none other than Adam Driver, but this film is colossally bad. I don't even know if saying colossally bad is true. I barely remember this film because it was so forgettable. Adam Driver travels through space because in space he doesn't have universal healthcare and his daughter is about to die, and then he crash lands on Earth 65 million years ago and he has to get some girl to the other side of the place they're in and fight dinosaurs. I watched this in the cinema at like 11 a.m. and it was incredibly and unbelievably boring. And that's why it's in 48th place with 1.5 stars. Also with 1.5 stars is perhaps a film that is worse than the 65. Why is it ranked higher? We'll get to that. In 47th place we have A Heist Before Christmas. This is a Sky original Christmas film set in Northern Ireland, I believe, from memory. If you don't know what Sky is, it's basically our version of HBO, I think. I don't really know what HBO is. I ranked this film higher than maybe it deserved because it was such a smaller budget, and it has less potential to be good than something like the 65 did, which had a big budget and big stars and big Hollywood money. This film was simple and it was quite dumb. It was about this insane guy who thinks he's Santa, spoiler alert, and it's about this guy who goes and robs a bank looking like Santa, and it's about this kid who's in poverty and he wants to get all the money to buy his brother a bike. And like, sure, there are some real upsetting scenes in this film, not like upsetting in the usual way, but upsetting in the way that kid is just horrible to his mum and that sort of thing, and I just didn't enjoy watching it. But then, like, I don't think they fully resolved a lot of those things, so I kind of just left that film feeling bad and being like, ugh, that's not a nice kid, and that's just not a nice situation. Which I guess, is what a lot of films do effectively, but when I'm watching a Christmas film, I expect something different. In 46th place, we have Meg 2, The Trench. Also with 1.5 stars. If you couldn't tell, that was my Jason Statham voice. I love kaiju films. I don't love the first Meg film. I think the first Meg film is pretty good. The second one, it has some fun in the second half, but the first half is incredibly dull. In the second half of the film, they set up this big, a big series of action set pieces taking place on an island where a Meg is attacking a giant squid or octopus or whatever is attacking, and then there's all these little dinosaurs also attacking, and those scenes have some fun moments. The first half of the film is just as dull as dishwater. It's about him exploring the trench and, getting to the bottom of the ocean, and he's like, now there's 3 Megs. Last time I fought 2, and now there's 3, and he's bigger than the last Meg. I have so much fun doing it, and I know it's bad. And it's just not a good first half of the film with them exploring the trench and being like, oh, where's the Meg? What's going on? Yeah, it's just not good fun, and it's not good, and Jason Statham, be in some good films, please. In 45th place, our second film with 2 stars since everyone knew it was coming, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. This is my least favourite MCU film, and I am upset that it's bad. I mean, I don't go into any film hoping it's bad. I go into every film hoping it's good, and I'm disappointed that this film was just absolute trash. Like, the whole CGI landscape of the quantum realm was horrid. MODOK, I mean, he had some fun moments, was horrid. Kang, he was pretty good. Jonathan Majors turns out to be horrid, but he had some good moments, and I think he had some good scenes with Janet Van Dyne, Michelle Pfeiffer, but that's not the film. The film is Scott Lang and Cassie Lang, and I guess Hope Van Dyne, who is barely in the film, exploring the quantum realm, and I just didn't enjoy the exploration of the quantum realm because it felt so boxy. You could tell they were on the volume, because they'd be walking along the volume, and then they'd get to the end of it, and you knew that like, they couldn't pass off screen anymore. Sure, it had some alright moments, but I think a big fatal flaw at the very core of this film is the fact that what's fun about Ant-Man is his growing and shrinking amongst, the world we live in, and him, using the Thomas the Tank Engine train as a weapon, as a huge battering ram. Stuff like that is fun because you see how he scales close to objects we're all familiar with. You completely lose that in the quantum realm. We were just talking about Jason Statham being in bad films. In 44th place is Fast X. I watched F9 before watching this film, and I think F9 is a bad film, and I despised it when I went and watched it in the cinema by myself originally. The trick is to bad films like Fast X, like F9, watch it with a friend, and you'll enjoy it a lot more. Because I enjoyed watching Fast X, because me and my friend I was in the cinema with were just laughing at this film the whole time. It's action set piece after action set piece that just aren't interesting, aren't innovative, and just all the characters, other than John Cena, are incredibly dull and samey. Like, there is nothing to Vin Diesel's character in these films. He is as flat as a board. There's nothing there. And I mean, there's just no personality, there's no emotion behind these films. It's all just grey action, and that is really upsetting, and the story did not work for me. I think Jason Momoa was kind of a weird choice as the villain. Like, sure, he brought some character to the film that the film was lacking, but other than that, it just didn't really work with him there. I think the way this film is structured as a part one does not work. I think I don't have an issue with part one films, but the way this structures itself as a part one and the way it leaves the door open for part two does not work. I'm thinking about doing like a full YouTube video about all the part ones of this year, because there are a few as we'll go through it. But yeah, John Cena was a bit of fun. Jason Momoa was alright. Everyone else was dull. The action was dull. And then they bring back Gal Gadot in probably the funniest cameo of the year. And the funniest Gal Gadot cameo of the year, despite the fact she has like 3. And then Dwayne Johnson's back. Who cares? I don't care about Fast and Furious anymore. I don't know if I ever did. In 43rd place, upgraded to 2.5 stars, is Plane. I don't really remember this film, but I remember it working. Plane is a film where a plane crashes on an island and they have to try and get off the island despite the fact there being pirates on the island. It stars Gerard Butler and Luke Cage, who's called Mike Colter, and it's fun. Mike Colter's like a ex-convict, and he's on the plane and he gets freed and he has to go and fight some people. Gerard Butler's the pilot. The plane crash itself is an excellent scene. I think that's a really good moment of tense cinema. Like, if flying stresses you out, don't watch it, because I think it successfully just kind of creates that fear and tension and paranoia about flying. The island stuff, it works. I think it drags out a bit too long, and to be honest, I watched this film right at the start of the year and the details just slipped out my brain as soon as I left the cinema. But I remember enjoying it. It's fine. As just a silly action film, it's pretty good, and I think they're making a sequel, and why not? I'll watch it. In 42nd place is Wish, the only Walt Disney animated film of this year on their 100th anniversary. And it is not a good film. I don't know why I said it like that. First things first, the animation style is just hideous. People kept saying they wanted another 2D animated Disney film, but that costs money and that takes too much time, and you actually have to pay animators and give them reasonable hours to do that. So instead they went for this kind of thing where it's a 3D animated with like a 2D sheen over the top, and it just looked horrid. Like, the animation itself was not nice to look at. It was also just the design of the characters in the world was bland and just plasticky, and it just looked the same as every other Disney animated film I've seen recently, despite the fact that being some great ones. And the story, it was fine. The music was a bit too Lin-Manuel Miranda-esque for me. I know that's a common complaint online, despite the fact Lin-Manuel Miranda didn't write the music, but it feels like his music compared to something like Frozen, or something even old like any of the Disney films in the 90s. And yeah, the cast was forgettable. the plot was pretty forgettable and like convoluted in this kind of fantasy world they'd set themselves up in with the wishes and all that nonsense. And overall, I didn't enjoy watching it. I was also very ill when I watched this in the cinema. In 41st place with 2.5 stars is Rebel Moon Part 1: A Child of Fire. I was lucky enough to go to the premiere of this film, and I think watching it on the huge BFI IMAX screen, if you don't know, that's the British Film Institute's cinema screen in the opposite Waterloo. It's the biggest cinema screen in the UK. It was an incredible screen to watch a film on, and I think a Snyder film was really elevated by watching it on that screen, because especially with like Army of the Dead and Rebel Moon, he's done some weird things with focus that I think looks really crap on a normal TV. So seeing it in the cinema definitely helped, and the sound was great, and it was a good event, not a good film. It's just the characters have no personality. The plot is fine, like it's very Star Warsy, it's very The Seventh Samurai, but the film just has no plot, and the characters have no personality. Like, this is an ensemble film. This is a film, if you don't know, about a character called Cora, played by Sofia Boutella, recruiting a team to stop the Empire, the Star Wars Empire, but it's not the Star Wars Empire, they're space Nazis. And she goes around planet to planet for most of the film, recruiting someone to the team, and then being like, okay, you're on the team, yeah, come on the ship. And then they'll come on the ship, and then for the rest of the film, they're just a background character. They do nothing for the rest of the film until the big fight at the end. And it's so upsetting, because it's got such a good cast, and these characters are set up really interestingly, but they don't talk to each other. They don't form bonds, they don't fall out, they don't become friends, they don't learn from each other. They just sit in a ship and don't talk until they meet the next one, and then the next one just joins the background, and then they all do a big fight at the end, and it's fine. This film is painfully fine. I don't like Zack Snyder as a director. I'm just going to throw that out there. As a guy, sure, he seems great, but I don't like his films. I don't like what he did with Superman. But Rebel Moon is a bad film, and I'm sorry for my little rant there. I've been thinking about Rebel Moon a lot recently. We are now entering the 3-star films. In 40th place is Theatre Camp. That was a lot of sounds that really confused me. Theatre Camp just isn't my sort of film. It's a mockumentary about a theatre camp in America. This might surprise some people, but I was never a drama kid, and also the idea of like a summer camp in the American style is very alien to me. So I'm sure a lot of the references they had about like drama kids and about summer camps just whoosh, went over my head. I did really find this film very funny, and I just found all the characters, apart from the kids, quite unlikable. And not in a way that worked. So I struggled to enjoy this film, but it was pretty good. Like I understood why people love this film, because I think it really does a good job of encapsulating this thing I don't understand. At least I assume it does. In 39th place is Transformers: Rise of the Beast. I watched this film about 2 weeks ago for the first time, and I don't really remember it. It's just a fun, silly action film with a really bad G.I. Joe placement at the end, and I think the designs are cool. We actually get some Transformers. The Transformers look cooler than they do when Bay did it. The action was alright, but there was a lot of it, and just the characters I just didn't really gel with. That's all I got to say on Transformers: Rise of the Beast. Give us more good Transformers films, though. Just keep them going. Just make a good one for once, please. I mean, this film's fine. In 38th place is Mithrigan. Technically, I think a 2022 film, but all like national releases. We're 2023, so it's on this list. I had fun with this film. I'm struggling to remember it because it would have been the first film of 2023 I watched. It was just a bit of fun, you know. I really enjoyed the creation of it. I think the way Mithrigan looked was really, really great. I know she's called Megan, but I'm just being a silly goofy guy for calling her Mithrigan. I think the design was cool. I think there were some good moments of horror, but I don't think they lent into it enough. I think they were trying too hard to keep it PG, and I'd like to see a sequel. I'd like to see a Mithorgan. In 7th place is one of the highest grossing films of the year, and that is the Super Mario Bros. Movie. This film is fun. This film is fine. I think the animation works. I think it looks good. I like the world it takes place in. I just think this is a very safe play. And like, I don't blame them for playing this film safe, because it made so much money, and maybe if they tried something a bit riskier, it wouldn't have made as much money. And maybe if they tried something a bit riskier, they would have ended up with the Super Mario Bros. Movie, which is the previous one, which isn't an awful film. I'll say it. It's a bit... If it was unconnected from Mario, I think it would be kind of a cult classic. But that's a different conversation to be having right now. The Super Mario Bros. Movie, I think it was cast pretty well. I think Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Pratt were a bit... I don't think there was much there, but Charlie Day's Luigi was great. Of course, Jack Black was great. Seth Rogen was Keegan-Michael Key was great. There were some solid voice performances there, and then some fine ones. I don't think anyone was bad. But the plot was just so and samey, and they didn't really try anything interesting with it. And I'm not being like, hey, when you make a Mario film, you have to make it like deep and just make it like, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like, it doesn't have to be a work of art. But stuff like the Lego Movie, stuff like, Spider-Verse, there are Puss in Boots 2. There are genuine great animated films for kids where the characters have an arc, where the characters learn something, where there's an underlying message which works well throughout the film, and this film completely missed that. In 36th place is Renfield. I like the casting in this film. I think Nicholas Hoult is a great actor. He's going to be a great Lex Luthor. I think Nicolas Cage is a lot of fun, and I like him as Dracula. I think this film really works when it leans into the weird... it leans into the weird supernatural stuff with Dracula and Renfield and their relationship and the action. I think the action was a lot of fun, but I think what doesn't work here is Awkwafina. I don't hate Awkwafina like a lot of people online does, but I don't think she really works in this film. And this underlying like police drug plot line about corrupt cops that run through this film, I think that doesn't work, and they spend too much time focusing on that and not enough time focusing on Renfield and Drac. I want to suck your blood. 35th place is another recent film, and that is Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, the Aquaman sequel. This film's good. This film's completely fine. Like, it's passable, and I think if this film was released 5 years ago, it would have had a lot better reception than it did now, because I think it's similar, very similar quality to the first Aquaman film, which I also enjoyed. What really works here is Patrick Wilson. His portrayal of Orm, alongside Jason Momoa, I think is a lot of fun, and I think their chemistry really does work, and the action works. I think Black Manta is a menacing villain. I think they could have lent into that stuff more. But this film's pretty good. I liked it. I don't know why I'm speaking like this now. 34th place is Five Nights at Freddy's. I think this is another issue of a film trying too hard to be PG-13. I think the lore was a bit over the top, and it was a bit like overbearing. And I think it could have lent more into the violent stuff. And I'm not saying for a horror film it has to be good, it has to be rated 18 and you have to see limbs fly off people or whatever, but I'm just saying this film didn't really commit to anything it was going for, and it looked amazing. The animatronics are really, really great, but I'm here explaining why this film isn't ranked higher. I did enjoy it overall, hence why I got 3 stars. In 33rd place is Elemental. I know this is said a lot, but it does feel like a pitch of Pixar films are all the same. What if they did a Pixar film about fire and water and they're falling in love? It's fine. Like, the animation feels more like a test reel. I feel like there's not much emotion behind it. I don't think there's much emotion within this film. Like, sure, the plot works and the characters work and the story works, but there's not emotion within the animation, there's not emotion within these characters, and I just didn't really care for it. I think Pixar is really falling behind in the animation game, as we're going to get to when we talk about other animated films. Also with 3 stars in 32nd place is Asteroid City. Asteroid City is fine. I think I'm usually a big Wes Anderson fan. I love Grand Budapest Hotel. Fantastic Mr. Fox is one of my favourite films ever, but this just felt overindulgent from Wes Anderson. I think the way it was just so emotionless. I'm talking about films being emotionless quite a lot at the moment, but it's an issue. I think the way this film was emotionless did kind of make that element of it fall flat for me, where, I think it was kind of overindulgent in being like, oh, everyone likes Wes Anderson. Here's let's make this film so Wes Anderson. I think that element of it didn't work. I think his films work better when he does have the elements of comedy, especially. And this did have comedy. It had a lot of dry comedy. I mean, comedy in the style of the Grand Budapest Hotel, and heart in the way Fantastic Mr. Fox has heart. I think that's where Wes Anderson shines, and this film shows none of that. Our first 3.5 star film in the 31st place is Knock at the Cabin. I love Dave Bautista, man. I love Dave Bautista more than anything in the world. He's just one of my favourite actors. This film is genuinely tense, and I like how they leave the ending open-ended. You're like, oh, is this thing actually real or is it not real? I think the characters were threatening, like the threats that showed up. I think all the performances worked. I think they could have lent more into certain elements of it, made it weirder, made it scarier, just committed more to something, because I think this is one of those films in the list where I feel like they're not really committing to anything and they're trying to make it like straight down the middle film, and that doesn't always work for me. In 30th place is Cocaine Bear. Funnily enough, I think this film has exactly the same flaw that Renfield has. When it's a bear just going on a rampage, I loved it. There's an ambulance scene where a bear terrorizes an ambulance. That scene's incredible. Like, I think it really works as a goofy horror film, and they did really lean into that in certain parts. But talking about not committing to things, the way this film doesn't work is when they rely too heavily on the cop, drug, corrupt cop plotline, which is exactly the same issue I had with Renfield. I think these two films commit to these very similar subplots too much and don't focus on the big, weird, cool thing they've got in the film, which is either a bear high on cocaine or Nick Cage playing Dracula. In 29th place is Tetris. I think this is a fun biopic. I think it takes itself a bit too seriously in some ways. I think it's a bit too stylized and like, oh, we're a film about Tetris and we're all serious. I'm going to be completely honest, I'm struggling to remember this film. But I enjoyed it and I ranked it in whatever place I just said. It's ranked in whatever place it says there or there. I'm losing the plot. Okay, this is a long YouTube video and I haven't filmed a long YouTube video in a while. So I'm just going to gather myself and then I'm going to keep going. In 28th place, we have Shazam! Fury of the Gods. Is this film memorable? No. Is this film amazing? No. Is this film better than the first Shazam film? No. Is this the best DC film of the year? No. Is this film bad? No. I think Zachary Levi works as Shazam. I think the kid who plays Billy Batson, Asher Angel, does look a bit too old to be Shazam now. I think he looks about the same age as Zachary Levi, but I think what works here is the family dynamic. I think that is really fun, and I think the villains, yeah, they're forgettable, but they serve their purpose within the film. They work. I think this film has some genuinely really funny moments. I didn't mind the skittle ad in the middle of the film, and I think it looks good. I think the CGI is really solid, especially when you compare it to some other superhero films of this year. In 27th place is Chicken Run Dawn of the Nugget. I love Wallace and Gromit, and I love Aardman. You know, like within arm's reach here. This wasn't planted as a prop. I have my Gromit mug. Chicken Run Dawn of the Nugget isn't as good as the first Chicken Run. I think it is a bit it's a bit generic, but I think the Ocean's 11 dynamic of it worked. I think there's some really funny jokes, and I think the animation, as always, is incredible. Claymation blows my mind as someone who doesn't know anything about animation, but Claymation, I think, is genuinely an incredible, just mind-boggling art form, especially when you have stuff like Wish, where that whole purpose is like, oh, let's just make this animated film easy to make and cheap, where Claymation is just so precise and delicate and phenomenal. In 26th place, we have Cat Person. Cat Person, I think, is a solid film. It's about a woman starting an online relationship with an older man while she's in college. And she's like, oh, this man seems really nice and trusting, but maybe this man isn't really nice and trusting. And there are some real uncomfortable scenes in this film as they explore like the real rawness of like the awkward beginnings of a relationship. And I think they do a really good job, because this film isn't meant bad, as I'm sure some people watching it would have said. I think they do a really good balance of being like, oh, is the girl kind of an asshole for ghosting this guy? Is this guy a creep, and is he trying to, take advantage of her? And they never really fully answer these questions, and I think it's weighed up really, really well, these questions. And the first two acts are great. I think this film also has a really good style in the way they show these messages and the way they show the relationship developing. It entirely falls apart into the third act. I'm not going to go into details, but it's just a generic action film third act, and I think that also in the third act they remove a lot of the vagueness, which I really enjoyed in the early parts of the film. So overall, it's a pretty good film. In 25th place, we have the third Hercule Poirot film, directed by Kenneth Branagh, and that's A Haunting in Venice. Originally, when I first watched this film when it came out in cinema, it was ranked a lot lower, on 3 stars, and then I rewatched it on New Year's Day actually, and it shot up the ranking, because I think there's genuinely great things about this film. If you're going into it expecting a whodunit that you can solve as you go along and look for clues and feel smart as you slowly piece things together and then feel really satisfied with the conclusion, this film's not for you. But I'm starting to look at these films as like Kenneth Branagh's passion projects, because there's some really interesting cinematography here. I think there's some really interesting direction from Kenneth Branagh, and I think this film looks great. It's kind of got this underlying horror element, which it's not really horror, but like they have these small just hints of it sprinkled throughout whodunit, and I think that's really interesting. I think they really delve into Hercule Poirot's psyche here, which I think is really, really interesting. And this film has some real cold lines. Like, the writer did a good job just making this feel like, oh yeah, oh, it's a good film. And I really like Kenneth Branagh's direction. I like his performance as Poirot, and I just enjoy these films as this weird little passion project, and I hope he gets to keep making them, because that's like the only reason I can think why these films are still being made, despite not one of them making great money. 24th place is Air. As a biopic, this was pretty good. It was funny. I think the characters worked. I think the story worked. I think the story especially worked when it's kind of about basketball. It's about Michael Jordan. Two things that aren't really big in the UK or popular in the UK. I know nothing about basketball. I know very little about Michael Jordan. Like, my Michael Jordan knowledge basically extends to Space Jam. But they still make you care about this story despite those facts, and I think that really, really works. People are going to call me crazy for this, and 23rd place is The Flash. And even when I see this, I'm like, am I crazy? I haven't rewatched this film since I watched it in the cinema. And yes, the CGI is bad, and yes, Ezra Miller's an awful person. The film's fun. Like, I enjoyed it when I watched it, and I feel like I do need to rewatch it, and if I rewatch it, it will move down the ranking. But I think the story works. I think the dynamic between the two Barrys work. I think Michael Keaton is really, really fun in this film. I think Supergirl is superb, despite the fact she's barely in the film. I think the story works. I think the cameo orgy at the end was quite upsetting. But I enjoyed this film at the time, and I feel hesitant to fully commit to this ranking. But it's what I put at the time, and I'm going to stick with that because I haven't rewatched it. In 22nd place, also with 3.5 stars, we have Gran Turismo. Gran Turismo is a film that came out this year. It's based on a video game. Did you know that? Ha ha ha. I think the product placement stuff was a bit on the head, but overall I think the story worked. I think it had a good emotional core to it, which I think a lot of these films can forget. And as a sports film, I think it does work. I think the cast works well. I think, the plot works well, and I think the race scenes really do a good job of showing tension and like fear in some of them. Overall, this film was fun. I wish it did better in the box office, sort of. 21st place is Nimona. This is a fun animated film. This looks good. This story is good. The characters work. I think the world it takes place in is unique. I didn't love it, but the world building was there, and it was solid, and it was something different. So I'm going to applaud it for that, even if it isn't exactly my cup of tea. I think I know a lot of people really, really loved this film, and I think it was pretty good, and I liked it. In 20th place is the film nobody watched, The Marvels. I think this film is getting completely overhated. I think, yes, the villain's dull, but the action is a lot of fun. The power switching really works. I think the film looks good visually. The CGI is there. I think the suit design is really, really good, apart from Miss Marvel's new suit, which I don't like. But what I think is best about this film is the relationship between the Marvels. I think Carol Danvers, Monica Rambeau, and especially Kamala Khan, played by Iman Vellani, work really, really well together. Iman Vellani completely steals the show, and I think their back and forth and their relationship and their bond throughout the film is a lot of fun to explore. And I think this film really works because it's short. It's like 90 minutes. If this film was any longer, I think I would hate it. But because you don't get time to think about anything, it's just a silly, fun action film with some good jokes in and a little musical number, which I always love. In 19th place is Blue Beetle, another film nobody watched. Unfortunately, Blue Beetle really, really works for me, and I hope we get to see this character again. I get it that it's quite a generic superhero film. I get it that it doesn't really do much new, but what works here for me is the family dynamic, and in the third act, the family matters for once, and each member of the family does something crucial in the third act, which helps the film go forward. That worked for me, and I liked it. Thank you. I'm really going through a streak here of films that people thought were bad, and I enjoyed, because next up in 18th place we have Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Give 'em hell, Indiana Jones! That's a reference to my podcast, HD Movie Talk. Go listen to it if you want to, and we did a whole episode on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. This film took some big swings, and I gotta commend it for that. I'm not gonna spoil the ending, but if you've seen the film, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This film takes a ginormous swing in the ending. It fully commits to a crazy idea to end this series of Indiana Jones films, and I loved it the entire time. I didn't know if they were going to do it. I didn't know which direction this film was going to go, but I think it really, really worked. That ending, I think the action was solid. I think Harrison Ford he slips back into the role really well. I think Phoebe Waller-Bridge was fun. I think Mads Mikkelsen was fun. I liked seeing Antonio Banderas for a little bit. This film wasn't excellent. This film isn't anywhere near as good as the first 3 Indiana Jones films, but it's a lot of fun, and I think it works. I think all 5 Indiana Jones films are pretty good.
This man has repeated the same line. I don't know, maybe.
I miss the desert. I miss the sea. I miss waking up every morning and wondering what the next adventure will be. This isn't an adventure. Those days are over. Maybe, Indy. Maybe not.
Are you done?
Give him hell, Indiana Jones!
In 17th place, we have The Hunger Games and the Ballad of Songbird and Snakes, or whatever this freaking film's called. I think this film's good. I think it shows a really interesting insight into how the Hunger Games developed, and it answers questions you didn't realise you had about why the Hunger Games are the way they are. I think Jon Snow really works as a character. I think Rachel Zegler is great in this film. I think the music is great. I think the scenes within the Hunger Games themselves are really, really great. They're really tense, and I think I think of a full R-rated Hunger Games film would be great. They're never going to do it, but I think that would really, really work. I don't think the possibility of that in my mind doesn't detract from the quality of this film. What I don't like about this film though is the pacing. I think the third part, because this film is split into part 1, part 2 and part 3, the third part sort of feels tacked on in the end. But I think Jon Snow works as a character, and I would like to see more Hunger Games stuff, because it is a world that I actually think has really interesting world building, and I think people are quick to dismiss it because they think it exists on this same plane as Twilight and Divergent and that sort of thing, but it's better than that stuff. In 16th place is Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. I freaking love the Mission Impossible films. I really, really, really love these films. Mission Impossible Fallout might just be the best action film of all time. This film doesn't live up to that, unfortunately. I think before this film, the Mission Impossible films were all really on an upwards trajectory of quality, and this film kind of dips it a bit. The part 1-ness of this film, this is another part 1 film we're talking about alongside Rebel Moon and Fast X, doesn't detract from it. I think the villain works. I think the threat, although vague and not fully explored, I think works, and I think it creates the pathway for a promising part 2, despite the fact the film doesn't look like it's going to be called Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 2. I think the action, as always, is great. I think the train scene is weaker than you'd think, but the scene in the airport is solid. I think, yeah, there's a lot of really fun action in this film, and Tom Cruise is just a crazy man. That motorbike stunt it gets me giddy when I see Tom Cruise do something stupid. In 15th place, we have Wonka. I really enjoyed this film. I love a good musical. I think the music here is really solid. I think the world is solid. I think the story is solid. I think it's got a great supporting cast. Matthew Bainton specifically stands out to me. What doesn't work for this film for me, and brace yourselves because I think this is a controversial opinion, is Timothée Chalamet. I think when he's trying to be the weird, goofy Willy Wonka, it feels like he's reading lines. It doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel like he really is this weird guy. He can't convince me he's a weirdo. Johnny Depp's a weirdo. Gene Wilder, he convinces me he's a weirdo in that first Charlie and the Chocolate Factory film. Timothée Chalamet, it doesn't fully work for me in the role. I think his musical numbers are great, but when he kind of does that fast talking thing, it kind of, I know it kind of sounds like a nitpick, but it did really impact my enjoyment of this film. But I think it was really fun. I also think Hugh Grant as an Oompa Loompa was upsetting. In 14th place, also with 3.5 stars, we have The Creator, directed by Gareth Edwards. Gareth Edwards is a great director. He really understands scale. He really understands how to make a film look good. Godzilla, phenomenal film. Rogue One, phenomenal film. This, slightly weaker than them, but the way he made this on such a small budget was really great. I think the plot was really interesting, and I would like to see more of this world. I think it just worked overall. In 13th place is a film I am absolutely heartbroken did not do better in the box office, and that is Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Amongst Thieves. I'm a big D&D guy. I love me some D&D, and I think this film really explored the ideas of D&D really well. I like the party. I think it does a really good job of showing high fantasy, and it made me realise I really want to see more high fantasy films. I think the story of it works. I think Hugh Grant works as the villain here better than he did in Wonka. And yeah, I think it looked good. I think it was fun. I think it had some really, really solid jokes. I think the cast was really solid. Chris Pratt and Sophia Lillis stand out to me especially. And I just would love to see more in this world. And it's not just because I love Dungeons and Dragons, but that's because I love fantasy and I want to see more high fantasy stuff, because there's literally none of it. It's just not really a genre that exists at the moment, and I find that deeply upsetting, because all fantasy stuff is like Game of Thrones, where it's like, oh, this is all serious and real. We only show a little bit of fantasy. Well, I just want to go balls to the walls. Here's a displacer beast. Here's a gelatinous cube. There's dragons everywhere. It's sick. It's a sick film. In 12th place is our first film with 4 stars, and that's Missing. This is the sequel to Searching. It's a desktop movie, which means like it all takes place within a computer screen or a phone screen, and it's about a daughter searching for her missing mother. I think the first film in this series does a really good job of creating twists and turns that you don't expect and breaking your heart and then reassembling it. This film does that again in a really interesting way and in a different way, which really surprised me. I always think when I leave a film like that, I'm like, oh, how are they possibly going to subvert our expectations again and create something interesting and intriguing? And they did it again, and I'm so happy. And I would love to see more of this series of films, because I think they're quite niche and interesting, and there's not really much else like it. In 11th place, we have Scream 6. I think this film was a lot of fun. I think the kills worked. I think the cast worked. What kind of disappointed me about this film was it didn't really feel like the subversion of the horror genre, of the slasher genre, like these Scream films usually did. It just felt like one of the films within that genre. It didn't surprise me in any way. It didn't go, oh, the twist at the end really surprised me about who the killers are. By the end of the film, I was like, oh, okay. But the horror worked. I think that, yeah, I don't think they lent into it being in New York enough, because the whole marketing around this film was like, oh, New York, new rules. But I don't think they lent into that part of it enough. I'm really interested to see what happens with Scream 7 now, with all the behind-the-scenes drama. But this film was fun. We have made it to the top 10, ladies and gentlemen. And entering the top 10, we have Are You There, God? It's Me, Margot. This is just a fun coming-of-age story. And I love a fun coming-of-age story. They're all very similar, but this film does some unique things. It explores religion in a interesting way without being like, hey, religion's bad and this religion's good and whatever. It doesn't do any of that. I think it just kind of explores what religion does to families in an interesting way, and I think it involves puberty in an interesting way as well. I think it's sweet. It's just like a warm hug. I think there are some real emotional scenes. I think there are some really funny scenes, and I think it does really. It doesn't hold back its punches, and it kind of does show this image of adolescence. In 9th place, we have Creed 3. I'd only ever seen one Rocky film before this year, and before the week Creed 3 came out, I had surgery, so I had to just stay home all week with nothing to do, so I watched all Rocky films, and I fell deeply in love with them. I think Creed 3, maybe my least favourite Creed film, but I think Jonathan Majors, Awful Man, works as an awful villain. I think the villain works really well, but what really elevates this film for me and sets it apart from other Creed and Rocky films is Michael Jordan's direction. I think he does unique things behind the camera, especially in that final fight, which really, really work and are really memorable to me. Obviously, it's deeply upsetting we didn't get any Sly Stallone in this film, but I kind of didn't feel this film had a Sly-shaped hole in it. I think they did a good job covering that, and I think Tessa Thompson's great in this film too. Please give me more films in the Rocky world, and please, I know he's not coming back, but just please bring back Sly. In 8th place, to everyone's surprise who watched this film, we have Blackberry, a genuinely excellently entertaining biopic. This film, I as a concept, I'm kind of anti-corporate biopics, because they're kind of like celebrating I'm not going to get into that. This film is really fun. I think this film is kind of shot in an Office-esque style. I think the story is really interesting. The story is gripping. The story is tense. The way they jump forward through time doesn't feel jarring. I think that works. But also this film is incredibly funny. Like, it's really, really funny, but then it still manages to end on a poignant and upsetting note. The story of the BlackBerry, who knew it was so interesting? I owned a BlackBerry. I really enjoyed this film. I think the cars worked. I think it was funny. I think the direction was really, really cool. And I think the story was really, really solid. In 7th place, we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. This film was fresh. This film was new. The animation was really, really solid. The cast was great. The way they had the kids improving off each other was really fun. The third act was a little weak. I think the third act was weaker than the first and the second, but the film did end in an interesting spot for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I think that really worked. In 6th place, we have Barbie, the movie of the year in cultural impact, I would argue. I watched Barbie and then Oppenheimer, in case anyone is wondering, in the same day. I only watched it in that order because that's the order the viewings were available in. And Barbie was a really great film. I think it's genuinely one of the funniest films in the past few years. I'm glad to see a comedy film performing as well as this does, because you don't really get big budget, high box office comedy films nowadays. And this really, really worked. I think the thing that is best about this film is also the thing that's worst about this film. The thing that's best about this film is Ryan Gosling. He is incredibly funny. He really does that role really, really well. The songs he performs are great, but I think the disappointing part is the third act kind of just turns into the Ken show, and they kind of end the third act and they're like, oh, we need to resolve Barbie's character now. Do you remember her? And I think that's where this film kind of does feel a bit disappointing. Which is a shame, because Ken is so great and I'm glad he got the focus he did, and I'm glad Ryan Gosling is getting the attention he deserves. I'm glad I made my big screen debut as literally him. But I think the way it kind of sidelines Barbie is a bit like, oh, that's sad. But the film is great. The film is really amazing. That's just my one complaint. We are entering the top 5. In 5th place with 4.5 stars is John Wick Chapter 4. I watched all the John Wick films in the lead up to this film, and I didn't really like them. I didn't really like the John Wick films until I think there was one moment in part 3 where I was like, oh, these films are slapstick comedies. And if I watch a John Wick film as a slapstick comedy, I think it's really great, because it's kind of like a dark, sadistic slapstick comedy in a lot of ways. Like the stair scene in John Wick 4. That scene was so funny. And John Wick 4 has some of the best action I've ever seen. Like that over-the-top gun scene, the stair scene, the final scene. I think John Wick as a character, is really interesting. I think the world-building stuff is always a bit weak for me in these films, but John Wick 4 is incredible. It did not feel as long as it is. We've had a lot of long films this year, and this film felt like a brief walk in the park, despite the fact it is quite long. The action was just phenomenal. It was just, I know I keep talking about the action, but what else is there to talk about in the John Wick film? The cinematography was really solid, but the action was unbelievable. Keanu did great. The stair scene, like I said, was really funny. I just really, really loved this film, and I was surprised by how great it was. In 4th place, we have Oppenheimer just beating Barbie. Oppenheimer was a great film. It's not something I want to watch again. It's not something I want to... I think it is kind of a cinema-only film. I don't think it has that at-home appeal for me. I think the cast was really great. Cillian Murphy was phenomenal. The bomb scene, amazing. One of the best scenes of the year. The reason I ranked this film higher than Barbie was because it really did stay with me. Like, I left that cinema and I was like, oh, like it's not a scary film, but it fills you with such a deep existential dread, but in a fun way. Like, this film was really well made. I'm not a Christopher Nolan fan usually. I think Christopher Nolan is overrated. I'm sorry I said that, okay? I'm sorry. But this film is his best film, and it is great, and I'm glad it got the recognition it deserved. We're in the top 3. The bronze medal goes to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I freaking love James Gunn as a director, and I freaking love the Guardians as characters, and I think the trilogy is the best superhero trilogy out there. The first time I watched Guardians of the Galaxy 3, I didn't cry that much. The second and the third time I watched it in the cinema, and the fourth time I watched it at home, I bawled my eyes out. I think the first time I was bracing myself for these characters to die so I could really cry. But I'm glad they didn't go in that direction, because this film had such a mature and bittersweet ending, and I think that really, really worked. I think the soundtrack is great. I think just everything they do with the High Evolutionary is great. I think he's really scary, played by Chukwudi Iwuji. I think I just love all these characters so much. Dave Bautista's great in this film. Bradley Cooper is phenomenal. It really, like, I don't think I've ever cried at a film as much as I cried at Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and that is just because I've had the emotional connection to these characters built up over the years. But James Gunn just really played me like a fool here. This film is incredible, and I cannot wait to see what he does at DC. We have made it to the top 2 films. They both have 5 stars, and I think the film in second place is the film everyone was expecting to be in first place. In second place, we have Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is one of my favourite films ever, easy. I think what Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse has above Across the Spider-Verse, that was a confusing sentence to say, was the fact that they have these big memorable moments and they tell the complete story. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse completes our part 1 talk of this film, because, you know, we had Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, we had Mission Impossible Dead of Reckoning, we had Fast X, and we had Rebel Moon. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse looks phenomenal, and I cannot stress this enough. This looks unlike any film I have ever seen before. Every single frame is a work of art. How every world looks different. The way Gwen's world looks is phenomenal. The way the Spider-Man India world looks is phenomenal. The ending kind of noir world is beautiful. The action is beautiful. The character arcs really, really work. Why this works as a part 1? I know I said I might make a whole YouTube video about this, but this works as a part 1 because although the plot isn't told completely, the character arcs are told in a complete way without resolving the plot, and I think that's really excellent. The Gwen stuff is great. The Miles stuff is great. It was great to see Peter B. Parker again. Spider-Punk really, really works. Spider-Man India works. And I cannot wait for the 3rd part of the greatest trilogy of all time. It's gonna do it. I just know I adored this film. It looked amazing. Wow. What beat this film? I know you're asking, what can possibly be better than Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse? A film that was just mind-blowing. That's Godzilla -1. I don't know if you know this about me, but I am an extreme Godzilla fanboy. I just love that guy. I just love him. I love all the silly Godzilla films, and I love all the serious Godzilla films. I love Shin Godzilla. Shin Godzilla used to be my favourite Godzilla film. This is now my favourite Godzilla film. For the first time, I think they have made the human story incredibly more interesting than the Godzilla story. Like, you could take Godzilla out of this film, and you could build, obviously you'd have to move a lot of stuff about, but you could build an interesting story here. The story they tell with the kamikaze pilot coming home and like coming to a ruined Japan, and the way they portray Tokyo as absolutely just crippled by the war, and then just being -1 by Godzilla was just beautiful. And when Godzilla finally shows up, it is beautiful. It is terrifying. The reason I love Godzilla so much is because he always fills me with this existential dread, like Oppenheimer, and it just worked so well here. This film made me cry multiple times. The characters are so intensely interesting, and I think Godzilla, it works really well in this film. Looks amazing. Just everything about this film works on a phenomenal level. The action is great. The music is great. When they hit the Godzilla score, they do it a couple times in the film. When they hit the Godzilla score, you're like, oh! And it feels so good. I just think the performances were out of this world. The Godzilla action and the Godzilla stop Godzilla at the end was out of this world. If you have not seen this film, just watch it. Even if you haven't seen a Godzilla film, just what I love about Godzilla is that he is always a metaphor about something. Even in the silly current American films, he's a metaphor about climate change, and he's often a metaphor about nuclear warfare, or just warfare in general, or just, government incompetence. There's a lot of things Godzilla can mean, and Godzilla means a lot of things in this film, but just seeing him as the personification of this deserted kamikaze pilot's guilt was incredibly powerful and scary. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think of my ranking down below. Tell me what your favourite film of the year is. Tell me what your least favourite film of the year is. Tell me how many films you watched this year. Tell me if you watched this entire video, because I know it's a long one, and I'm sorry, but I watched a lot of films and I'd love to talk about them. I'm going to try post more regularly on YouTube again. Now we're into the new year. Let me know if you've got any videos you want me to make, and I'm currently working on DCEU Phase 3. I hope it to come out sometime January, but I'm not going to promise that, because that might just end badly. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like this video, please comment down below, and please subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.